First of all, let me start by explaining what the term psychedelic means. The word psychedelic came to the fore within the 20th year, actually, 20th century, actually, and its outset started with the lysergic acid being synthesized and with the impacts on human beings being understood. It's a term that's a portmanteau of ancient Greek works, and it allows the psyche to expand and become visible in a sense. Psychedelic means just that. And psilocybin and LSD, when they were started to be utilized in the clinical sense by psychiatrists, they started experimenting with these substances and explained their experiences, saying that I'm sorry, Professor, if you have a slide, by the way. No, I don't have any slides. I'll just be speaking as we go. Just speaking. Anyways, so the outset, the dawn of the term was like that. So as I said, it's a chemical substance that allows your soul to come to the fore, to come to the play. And it has been a point of discussion. It has been a point of discussion indeed. And which molecules would be counted as psychedelic? We can answer that as, I mean, there are a few core molecules and a few controversial or controversial ones. So if we are talking about the core ones, we are talking about psilocybin, which is found in mushrooms, in naturally grown mushrooms, and LSD, which is synthesized in a laboratory environment back in the 1930s, if I'm not mistaken, in Sweden. So these are accepted as psychedelic substances by everyone. But what we mean by psychedelic is that it brings on a alternate or an altered consciousness state. And for most people, not all, but for most people, it really creates hallucinogenic impacts, effects. And these are what define the psychedelic substances. Beyond that, there is some discussion around other substances which are counted as psychedelic by some and by some that are not. MDMA, which is a recreational drug among the youth as well, in parties and so on and so forth, and ketamine. And ketamine is known to create dissociative and hallucinogenic effects for certain people. So it can be counted among psychedelic substances as well. So there are a few more molecules and substances that are being synthesized in a laboratory environment right now, but I will not be talking too much about that. And I don't know very well. I don't know the features of these substances very well, but we can expect a heightened impact, positive impact in the therapeutic sense as well. And amongst researchers, the question is right now is about whether we can synthesize psychedelic-like substances while avoiding the negative impacts as well. So if that is done, there are people that think it could be very good. So it could be called medicinal chemistry. And laboratory biology is an ongoing area of research as well. And in the coming years, we can expect many different molecules which we haven't heard about before come to the fore. So this is just an overall introduction to the situation. And I will be focusing more on psilocybin, types of psilocybin and NDMA, because these two have reached a critical stage when it comes to human trials right now. And for resilient depressive disorders and in different similar indicators, especially in addictions for alcoholism, we see many positive effects with the use of these molecules. We know about ketamine, And ketamine was researched in many different areas as well. So even though it may have dissociative and hallucinogenic impacts, of course, it's something different. I will not be touching upon that side of things. And for LSD, we can say that it's quite experimental right now. And it has a dark history, if you will. And due to that, it's not utilized that much in human trials, but we can say that LSD and MDMA is the go-to substances in this regard. And one more thing I would like to mention before we move on with the human trials is that these substances, the psychedelic molecules, have a different history in human societies as well, especially psilocybin, because it is a substance that has been derived from natural mushrooms, naturally grown mushrooms. So in South American societies, certain experiences, it is used to create certain experiences, transcendental experiences, and this is where it has reached the Western world as well. It's not something that the Westerners discovered or synthesized by themselves. It's something that comes from the Native Americans. But for those societies, for almost 3,000 years, it has been known as understood from anthropologic studies. And in such societies, it is used in a very controlled manner under very specific conditions and by very specific people. So it's not like it's being handed out on the streets. I mean, this is what happens in the Western societies right now, but to the contrary, it was used mostly by shamans and spiritual leaders and hierophants to create hallucinations, altered states of consciousness, to reach or experience metaphysical, spiritual states. So this is how it has been used for 3,000 years, and many societies knew about that. The Mayans, the Incas knew about that. But of course, it's not something that was used to just have a good time, in a sense. It wasn't a social phenomenon. It has a different standing. It had a different standing. So we actually experienced at the end of the 19th century a similar happening. So the cocaine that was I mean, yeah, usually what was done was that coca leaves would be chewed by the Native Americans to, create a sense of belonging and togetherness, and in different conditions and in a certain environment. And then the substance cocaine was synthesized by scientists later on, understanding its properties. Then the substance cocaine no longer became something that would be used under certain set and settings, and it became a street drug, if you will, or a party drug. And it became a deadly, addictive substance. So it has this negative history, as I said, and right now we know what cocaine causes. I mean, yeah, we can see derivatives, not chemical derivatives, but similar things like methamphetamine and so on, which are being utilized very frequently. So these substances that has been used for 3,000 years under certain conditions are being transformed into deadly substances. And the same could happen with psychedelics as well. I mean, and this did happen back in the 20th century. And we have to be quite aware and conscientious about this. And this is what I'm going to underline. There are dangers to be found here. It should not be made free for use. And psychiatrists should consider very well how they should be used. There are great dangers to be found here. I mean, yeah, the same thing that we had with cocaine had started to be experienced with psychedelics like psilocybin and so on. And in the Western societies, hallucinogenic and psychedelic substances started with the synthesis of certain substances. Back in the 50s and 60s, with the drugs subculture coming to the fore, smoking pots, drinking alcohol, what can we have? Then people turned to these traditional substances just for recreational purposes. So that was the understanding in the drug subculture. And then it became quite popular. It was quite also uncontrolled among the youths. Psilocybin and especially LSD became very popular and widespread. There were songs written, poems written about how good this experience was. And throughout societies, there were back in the times a mindset of liberty and the established conditions or the establishment itself, the academy, the religious institutions, the societal institutions, the responsible institutions had this free-for-all mindset back in the times. And incarceration of the users was stopped. So it was not legalized, but it was tolerated in a sense for 20 to 30 years back in those times. So why don't we have it right now? Why has this tolerance disappeared? To answer that, we have to look at the cases of loss of life that has happened. Specifically, we have to look at the addictions that were brought on. So it was like the users were at the beginning saying, I feel like a better person now, but afterwards they developed secondary addictions as well. So during the 70s, early 70s, the end of 60s, starting with the US authorities, public health authorities especially, and state institutions, once again returned to a process of illegalization and started incarcerating the users, preventing the synthesis of these substances, and psilocybin and LSD started to disappear. So just now, we have only a slight percentage of the society using these substances right now. But yeah, that is the case, right, as we stand. And especially issues that were very well known to the societies were known. There was one professor from the Harvard, Timothy Leary, if I'm not mistaken, a psychology professor. And he came to the fore like prophet for substances, psychedelic substances, and started preaching about the positive sides. And then this person, after taking LSD, jumps down from an 8-story balcony and kills himself. And then it was understood that you cannot control your behavior, you can jump off the building and so on. And these were the messages that were made widespread through the use of television programs and so on, television shows and so on. So ordinary people on the streets started to consider this from this perspective. But it was all about, yeah, this positive mindset started to decrease, and then the message was about saving the youth from these deadly addictive substances. And from 1970s until the last few years, there has been quite the radio silence. So none of these were researched or utilized. And in the recent times, we see, especially with psilocybin and MDMA, becoming more popular once again. And this is based on a few things. First of all, even though they are dangerous, quite dangerous at that, they also have psychotherapeutic features for human beings. They have positive and negative impacts and effects that are known. So in controlled environments like psychology laboratories, and not within the academy, but in the outside of the academy, there are studies, small-scale studies that are ongoing, that are also carried out by receiving the specific permits from institutions, relevant institutions, like the FDA in the United States. So there has been, at the end of the 90s or throughout 2000s, there were studies that were carried out. Of course, MDMA and psilocybin has their dangerous dark undercurrent as well. But if they are controlled, they can also provide many positive advantages, and this should be studied. That was the message that was made widespread. And in few journals, there were scientific there were scientific publications made. A few professors became interested in this area, and after 2000, especially in the last decade, there has been this new wave of interest that is growing. So the small molecular modifications are being made on well-known substances and so on. So for use in clinical research. So, and in that environment right now, the question is about why shouldn't we turn to psilocybin and MDMA once again? So this is where we are standing within the last decade. And within this last decade, especially in the US, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, especially in Western Europe, European countries, and mostly in the United Kingdom, we see these substances being researched. But specifically with the US, considering that it was the headquarters, if you will, of the psychedelic movement back in those times, there was this grown interest. Funds were allocated, new research centers were established, new clinical trials were made, and since we have this bottleneck when it comes to the production or synthesis of secondary antipsychotics, this is a new area of research, and there are new research centers that are being established in the US universities. For instance, in my hospital, there is no such center, but I'm working the Max General Hospital. It's a quite large hospital. I'm sure most of you know that. Sorry, I'm not working there, and they established such a center, and they asked our hospital, why we didn't establish one. So we are at this point where almost all leading psychiatry departments and services in the United States are looking to establish such centers. And where is the fund coming from, you may ask? And let me try and say the standard American Institute of Health, NIH, we know they are funding many different scientific and medical studies, and that is what is expected, of course. When a researcher comes with a new research idea, they go to NIH and ask for funds. And the psychedelic studies are not being funded by NIH right now. The money comes from private institutions, philanthropists, large-scale companies, business people, large-scale foundations. They are the financiers now, right now. The NIH and the state has a very turns a cold shoulder to this. But right now, as I said, private funds are being, yeah. And I can't really. At the same time, the substances are illegal within the states as well. I mean, yeah, you can be incarcerated by the police on the streets, and at the same time, federal governments are not, as I've said, quite warmed up to this idea right now. But at the same time, there are people who are trying to earn some money from this. There were some companies that were established especially to synthesize MDMA and psilocybin for therapeutic reasons. But of course, the licensing and patents will need to be taken, and the company that will do that will become multi-billionaires. So we should consider that as well, because the studies, most of these studies, as I've said, are being carried out not by independent state-funded researchers, but private company employees who are for profit. I mean, yeah, there are many important professors and experts in their own right who are working on these issues, but we should consider that as well. So there's this great, let's say, monetary interest on the side of the researchers as well. So let us now talk about what has happened recently within this last decade. And I would like to say a few things. In the studies that were carried out with psychedelics, let me just give you the overall picture. These substances have significant positive impacts on human health. For resilient depression, case of resilient depression, we see short-term persistent depression. So even within the first few hours of using the substance, we see improvements. And the same also can be said for treatment of alcoholism. And there was one very high-quality randomized clinical trial, and we saw a great improvement in alcoholics in that study with the use of psilocybin. So once they are taken within the first few hours, they create certain impacts. So there is this hallucinogenic and ritualistic side as well, and in the following hours, it creates quite a, let's say, nice sensation, positive feelings on the users in trials as well. I mean, but the same thing could be said for heroin as well. If you ask someone who used heroin within the first few hours, you can ask them, how do you feel? And they would say, I'm feeling great. And this is the reason why these are being used. I mean, yeah, the antidepressant effect does not mean that it is something that has not been seen before. So what matters is that we look at the long-term impacts, and the long-term impacts range from 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, even up to 12 weeks. So in the literature, we see such studies being carried out very recently. And once the psychedelic impacts start, within the first few hours, this improvement is shown, is marked, and it goes on for a few weeks. For some patients, you may need to redose as well. I mean, it will not go for forever, but I mean, yeah, the same can be said for ketamine, and in the long term, it will not be possible to carry out this treatment over only a single dose. And let's look at the negative aspects. Of course, there is the cardiovascular issues that can be caused, and depending on the dose in the acute period, it can cause changes in the heartbeat, and especially for middle-aged people, middle-aged patients, if they have, let's say, obscured cardiovascular diseases, it can cause many negative impacts, but it would not cause any serious harm for healthy young people. And the psychotropic negative impacts should be considered. In the acute periods, in the first few hours, it can cause hallucinations, impulsivity, behavioral changes or disorders, such as, attacking people around you or objects around you. And it can cause suicidal ideation and even attempts of suicide. So it's not like you can just write a prescription for that and say to your patient, directly go and use that. Of course, this will not be the case. At least I will not see that in my lifetime. And this is not something that will be utilized in our household. So it will always need some support. And the risk is quite high, let me say. So after that first few hours, what is going to happen? If you ask what's going to happen, sadly, we don't have much detailed information in the clinical trials. What I mean by that is that, for instance, when it comes to mania, psychosis, or other similar diagnoses, especially for bipolar disorder, considering that it is quite unknown what would happen. The clinical studies do not leave us with an answer in this regard because they are not accepted into these studies. And also in the longer term, it can cause addiction. So even though they may start as a treatment for, even though it may start as a treatment for depression, it can, I mean, it's not clear whether it can cause addiction in the long term, but it is known that they cause addiction. So with a goodwill understanding, you may start utilizing these substances, but in 2, 3 years, whether your patient is going to run to the streets to purchase the substances and use them on their own, well, yeah, it could happen. I mean, we cannot tell really because the researches only range from 6 to 12 weeks.
Çok genel açıdan bakınca
From a general perspective, it has pros and cons. I'm gonna share with you the details of the study. The psychedelics, the effects, the mystical experience. I see myself as a different person. New gates are opening to the new world. So I started approaching everyone with affection and tolerance. My life has become meaningful and I am more positive towards the world. This is what we hear commonly. However, within a few hours, they may start to say that she encounters very bad feelings. For instance, they may get harmed, or someone, when they say, I find the meaning of my life, and then afterwards they may lose it, and they just fall into emptiness. They should be motivated. So that is why most of the psychedelic works are conducted together with psychopharmacology. So when we are administering the drug to the patient, together with the patient, there is a need for a psychotherapist. And these sessions should not last for 45 minutes, but they can last up to 3, 4, 6 hours, because for some patients they recover within a few hours, but for some of the patients it may take them 5, 6 hours to recover, and it may be dangerous to leave them alone. That's why psychotherapy should be accompanying the treatment. Well, in the long run, if we don't work together with an expert psychotherapist, there might be risks and these unmet needs. If there is no effort exerted to the unmet needs, it may be dangerous. What does it mean? It means that, as mentioned by Professor Mesut, there's a need for a team. The psychiatrist who can prescribe the drug, who can administer the drug, and the psychotherapist. It can be a psychiatrist or someone else, but especially an expert should be present in the treatment, in the team. And the room, the place should be, location should be prepared, patients should be invited, and there is a need for 1 or 2 or more people to support the patient, and it requires a huge financial resource to ensure that. There are 2 reasons. Maybe it was not discussed widely in the society, but it will be discussed. The first thing is that, yes, psychotherapy should be provided, psychotherapists should be there, and inside the room, the patient, well, I'm just making up some things right now. My mom was treating me badly and she abused me, but I love her and I'm gonna hug her. At that point, psychotherapists should start discussing things with him. What do you feel now? What do you want to say? So it should not be done in an impulsive manner. After that emotion is processed, it can become a positive thing. But an expert therapist should be there. However, something totally different could happen as well. Romantic experience, human relations, past relations, Well, these are very specific and personal things, so psychotherapist should be a highly professional one because this issue is open to abuse. It's quite a vulnerable situation. The patient is vulnerable, used a substance in a different environment, and you are trying to help them. And well, some bitter experiences were there leading up to sexual abuse. So it's, well, it may be ending up with catastrophic outcomes for the patient. So this process requires investment, well planning ahead, and it should be controlled because such a drug, psilocybin, when you cannot administer it randomly, and the financial aspect. A physician, a therapist, a section of the hospital, or a nurse or a pharmacist, it requires that you need to employ them, you need to hire them for at least one day, and it is pricey. There is a need for planning in advance. So we need to be very well prepared, and the financial aspect, if it is too high, then who is going to pay for it? Government institutions, there are the social aspects, or a private insurance company, or should it be paid out of the patient's pocket? So at first instance, it will be paid by the patient. What does it mean? It means that it can be applied, it can be open to a very limited group of people who are capable of paying it. Or when there is a group that is depressed, when there is a group who can afford this, so that group would be the one to reach psychedelics, and which increases inequality among the society. So these are the aspects that are not being widely discussed yet. I'm also going to talk about some other aspects, but maybe in the Q&A session you may be asking questions. But I want to say that the quality of the clinical trials up until now in the publications, well, we should be tolerant in psychiatry, in the medicine itself, when the alternative treatments have kicked in, the data quality are not very high. These are mainly open label trials. And when there is an effect, if it is placebo or is there any other reason due to the social changes, due to other changes in the patient, maybe that's why the patient is recovering. So you cannot answer these questions in the first glance. And this is the case in cancer treatments, for instance, checkpoint inhibitors, immune suppressives. So the well, it doesn't start with the golden standard data. It starts with certain quality of data and then continues. It is the same for psilocybin and MDD. So the first trials were not qualified. However, recently we see more qualified trials. That is why there are significant publications in mainstream journals. New England Journal of Medicine, one of the prominent journals, 2 studies were published. Well, at the outset, they are not very qualified. However, there is some degree of interest, and in JAMA and Lancet, and in our journal we published 2 clinical trials in the last 2 years. So there is an increasing quality of clinical data. Controlled trials are performed. However, one of the ordinary problems is that, be it psilocybin or another substance that creates a huge spiritual experience, does it? How can you do the blinding or blind studies, because it carries the person to a very different dimension? However, it shouldn't be antidepressant, but something else. So, controlled, randomized works, and the sample size is growing, but patients who get psilocybin know it, who get placebo, they know it, and those taking psilocybin may say that yes, I feel better. However, the blinding is not made. That question is not asked to the patient in randomized controlled trials. When there is a blind study, the patient is asked, what do you think your group is? The group that is administered the drug or the placebo? They do not know it. But there is a chemical effect, neurobiological effect, that we see the antidepressant results. However, for psychedelic drug works, this is not the case, and other works are being criticized. And in our trial on drug addiction, at the end of the trial, the question is asked to the patient. The ones who take placebo know that, and the one who takes psilocybin know that. So this is also being criticized. Whether you do it or not, you are being criticized. So these substances, such substances, blinding is quite difficult. So with placebo, it's not possible. Instead of placebo, they try to administer benzodiazepine, or some antihistaminics are administered. That may cause a different mood in the patient. However, when they are compared to psychedelics, they are nothing. There is one recent study that attracted my attention. Guy Brooklyn's article in New England Journal of Medicine. He's an academic. In the last few years, he's transferred to a newly founded company aiming at marketing psilocybin as a drug. But in order to do blinding, in their work in New England Journal of Medicine, in the control group, they administered very low dose psilocybin, 25 or 50 milligrams of active psilocybin, and in the control group, 0.25 milligrams were administered. The patient feel that there is a different substance entering their system. However, the dose is very low. That's why acute antidepressant dose is not expected. So in this trial, when we asked that question to the patient, which arm do you think you were at? The answers are more clear. However, until today, in the most of the literature, in MDA, in post-traumatic stress disorder, this was used, and there are significant question marks. And when it comes to the quality of these works, as I stated before, in an acute environment, controlled environment, a patient with depression, you administer a substance, they feel better and say that they are feeling better. This is something good. However, what are the real negative aspects of this substance? The acute, there won't be any acute side effect. By supporting it with psychotherapy sessions and dose adjustments, and how many times should they be administered, etc. We are working on them. However, the negative aspect on the long run will be addiction or psychosis or mania. So in vulnerable patients, bipolar or psychotic patients, or those with a familial history, or those who abuse these substances, if they are to be administered to them, then there will be more psychosis, there will be more substance addiction, and there will be more suicide, or there will be more violence within the society. Because if it stays in the hospital environment, this is good, but we know that it won't be like that. It will be extended to the society, and there will be negative consequences. And we cannot expect the companies to take on the responsibility. They are commercial companies, so the responsibility lies with should actually lies with the academics and public institutions. And there is this impact in the New England Journal of Medicine, and when you are publishing great articles, etc., we do not eliminate the danger, it stays there. Well, that's all from me now. My take home message is that it's expanding rapidly, and it's expanding from extraordinary means, not from government funds. Well, I'm quite skeptical, and I am opposing to this. I discussed with the patients using it, and I'm discussing them with the physicians using it, and it's understood that there are positive aspects, and if we learn to use them better in the best way, then it can have a significant contribution in the treatment of depression and other diseases. However, what should be discussed right now is that what will happen in the society. So bipolar depression, their friends say that you can use microdose, and he started using microdose. However, that microdose turns into macrodose, and after a few months, the patient was suffering from mania and psychosis, and she was hospitalized. So we should be very well prepared for them. Thank you.